Hello, everybody, and welcome to Bright Founders Talk at Temi. Temi is an international software development company that designs, builds, and delivers software for sustainable businesses and promising startups. Welcome to our podcast, where we bring you the most inspiring stories of entrepreneurs and experts in the software development industry. And each week, we interview successful leaders who share their unique journeys and valuable insights. I'm your host, Barry. And today, we're lucky enough to be joined by a remarkable guest, Brian Crain, CEO and co-founder of Chorus One. Hello, Brian. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Barry.
It's our pleasure. Thank you so much for coming today. We know you're really busy, so we do appreciate you taking time out of your day for us. So for those people who don't know you, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the company that you work at?
Yeah, so my name is Brian. I'm from Switzerland originally, but I left Switzerland after high school. I went to college in the US, and then I lived in the UK for a while and in Berlin for a while. And I was kind of trying to figure out what to do. I was interested in entrepreneurship and in startups. And then I discovered Bitcoin. So this was in 2013. And that was a big revelation for me. I was just extremely excited about it. I felt that was the future. A lot of the ideas behind Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies and blockchains really resonated with me. And it also felt like this was just the beginning of something that would become very big. So I kind of went all in on crypto and Bitcoin. Actually, one of the first things I did at the end of 2013 was start a podcast. And that podcast is still running. We have done over 600 episodes. So it's the oldest crypto podcast at this point. And then, I was involved in a bunch of other stuff, but in the end, in 2018, start of 2018, I started a company called Chorus One, and that's really been where I've spent most of my time in the last, 7.5 years, sort of building that company, and happy to talk more about, what Chorus One does as well.
And we shall. When you first started your company, did you have like a network? Because I know that lots of CEOs say that the networking was really important at the start, and some people didn't really have such a network. What's your thoughts on it? Did you have a network, and is it important when setting up?
Well, I think if you start a company, right, there's obviously a lot of different things you need to be, or a lot of different things that go into, how successful you're going to be as a founder. And, that might be things like, are you experienced running a team? Do you understand product? Do you know sales? Do you have a network, right? Do you have a clear vision? Do you have a good co-founding team? So I think network is just one of those, right? I'm sure there are plenty of people who they may have other advantages, and maybe they don't have to network and they just built that as they built their company. And maybe in other cases, it's one of the core advantages you have. I think in my case, I did have a pretty good network. Actually, a lot of that came from the podcast because we had been doing this crypto podcast for, at that point, 4 years, or around 4 years. So, I had done, 150 episodes maybe at the time, or 100-ish. And so I had done many, many podcasts with many, crypto founders and key people in the industry. And that was definitely one of the advantages we had when we started the company.
So if we look at your early formative experiences, what would you say was the biggest risk that you took early on, and how did it play out?
Yeah, I mean, I took different risks at different times. Certainly, going into crypto was a risk, although it's not that I had some existing career in another industry that I was like giving up. So the opportunity cost was really not that high for me. I think then, but that, it took me quite a while when I got into crypto until I started having a job where I earned money. So there was in the beginning, so I had some savings, but I was kind of running through those savings. It's like, this is, at some point this needs to change, because otherwise this if you just sort of chart out the future, it does not look good. But fortunately that did. I mean, I think when we started Chorus One, of course that was also a risk, but I felt, for me, one of the main motivations was that I felt I would just learn a lot building a company. And and also my co-founder, we had been in crypto for quite a while at this point. And, we had a decent amount of success investing in crypto. So we kind of had enough of a financial cushion that it wasn't, we could handle that risk. Which, pros and cons, right? Because maybe some people they really thrive from having, this like pressure, and if they don't succeed at a short time, it's everything's gonna fall apart. I think personally, I prefer, if there's a little bit if it's a little bit more relaxed, there's some sense of security, because I think it can also give you a lot of opportunity to experiment and to take risks.
If we look at crypto, since we're talking about it now, like how has the global like regulatory environment shaped your approach to growth and operations?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's definitely a topic we thought a lot about at different times in our history, and the area that we operate in is called staking, which basically means that we run some infrastructure for some blockchain networks, and then the people who own the tokens of those networks, let's say Ethereum or Solana or a bunch of others, they can use our service to earn interest on these tokens. So staking, even today, has really not been regulated anywhere. Like, you don't need to get licenses, you don't need to do those kind of things. Now we do work with regulated companies, and so sort of by the transitive power, we have to maybe do some things, that can include things like, fulfilling certain compliance, security requirements. So we have that kind of thing to deal with. But overall, staking is a pretty unregulated space still at this point. And I would say it looks like it's probably going to remain pretty unregulated. So it hasn't impacted us like all that much.
What are the biggest misconceptions people have about like proof of stake networks and staking providers?
Well, hard question. I guess it depends a lot on, like, who you talk about. Is it people from within the crypto industry? Is it, people who don't know crypto at all? I think to people who don't know crypto at all, staking can be quite confusing. They don't really understand like where, I mean, it sort of feels like that the user experience is kind of like interest, right? Like you just get more tokens, and that's like pretty easy to understand. But then what happens underneath and how is that generated? That can be quite confusing to understand. But what we do is basically a similar kind of job that a miner does in Bitcoin, where we process the transactions, we create the blocks, we kind of secure these blockchains, kind of help make all of these crypto networks really run.
Are there any regions or communities that are like surprising you right now in terms of innovation or adoption?
So a lot of for us, certainly the US is a very important market, and has been and continues to be. I mean, there's just so much capital in the US, and now that the regulatory environment has kind of shifted and it's, very positive and pro crypto, I think that's going to continue being the case. In general, I think we just see Bitcoin as an asset class, for example, become really integrated in the financial system. And so I think in all the financial centers, it becomes more important. I think for some use cases, you really do see developing markets a lot. So, for example, stable coins, right? And especially places where their own local currency is unstable, a lot of inflation. You can't really trust the banks there. Maybe they have like capital controls. So places like Argentina, Venezuela, Turkey, I think in those places you actually do see quite a bit of stablecoin adoption and crypto use for payments. And that's super cool, right? Because of course that was kind of one of the main things that, we really wanted to deliver.
Do you think crypto has stayed true to its like decentralization ethos? Or do you feel that we're kind of drifting into centralization now?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's certainly very different today, right? I think it's certainly when I got into crypto, a lot of people were very ideologically driven, and there was a very strong values that were pretty embedded in a lot of crypto projects and a lot of the crypto community. And of course, that has changed. That's not really the case anymore. Today it's kind of an industry like many other industries, and people just come in and, they try to make a success and make some money. And so I think that culture has changed quite a lot. And in that case, too, decentralization, why does it matter? Does it matter? It's a good question, right? Because I think in the past, maybe you worried about the government, shutting down stuff, or privacy was a big topic, right? I think privacy is really kind of gotten neglected a lot, or it's, privacy is actually pretty bad on blockchains. I think the whole ideological question, the values question, it's a big question. And you do have new projects that, for example, have a lot of success currently, like one's called Hyperliquid, which really is not all that decentralized, including that the software of the Hyperliquid code is closed source. So you run it, you don't know what exactly it does. So I think we have seen that kind of shift, but the big question then becomes, how much does it matter? Is it really crucial, or do people care? Like, do the end users care? Or what kind of benefit does it provide? Because if it doesn't provide like a fundamental benefit, then yeah, maybe it's not that important. But so I think it's a very big open question, to like where crypto is going, how much is it gonna matter? I mean, we also see a lot of these layer twos, like the one Coinbase has called Base. Robinhood is doing one. These are also not really very decentralized. So we will see. It's certainly the case that the industry is changing a lot, and the sort of ideology that drove a lot of people in the beginning has become less important.
Like, what role should validators and infrastructure providers play in like on-chain governance, if any?
Yeah, that's a good question, and opinions certainly differ on this one. So you have different networks that have different approaches to this. So before I started Course One, I was chief operating officer of a project called Cosmos. And in Cosmos, it was actually kind of enshrined in the whole code, on-chain governance. So on-chain governance would basically mean that people could say, hey, I want to have this kind of change happen. And then the token holders, the people staking, could vote on these proposals. And, one token would be one vote. But if you did not vote, then kind of you would vote in the same way as your validator did. So it was this kind of voting system. And, that has worked pretty well. And a lot of networks ended up copying that. But then other networks have a different philosophy. For example, Ethereum has this idea that governance is much more something that happens in discussions and consensus, and in sort of a little bit of a nebulous way that isn't, strictly deterministic, and it's not that people can vote with their ether on like where should Ethereum go. So you do have different philosophies. I personally think validated governance is not bad. It helps give a lot of clarity, because you can have a vote, the validators can vote, and the validators are pretty engaged, so it's pretty easy to get them to vote. And then you can have a decision, and you know the outcome, and you can move on. Like a lot of the other governance processes where you don't have an explicit vote, it's really never very clear on like who exactly wants what, and when is it over, and is it really over. So, in Ethereum, a lot of these governance discussions can go on for years, and you never totally know what's going to happen. So, but of course, you can say there's downsides as well, because validators have their own economic interest, and maybe sometimes they diverge from other parties. So it's a widely discussed topic in crypto.
How do you balance neutrality with influence, like especially when you're actively participating in network decisions?
We do have a team that will look at these governance proposals and kind of think about, what's the right thing. Of course, we do have a particular perspective, but we do try to vote sort of based on what is in the interest of the network. Now, and that has also included in the past certainly voting against our own economic interests in some instances. So yeah, we do try to kind of vote based on what we think is the best thing for the network, and yeah, sometimes that kind of conflicts with our own interest.
It's quite interesting that you say that. But what excites you most about the next 5 years of crypto infrastructure? Is there anything coming up and you think, oh, you're really passionate about it?
I mean, one thing that I do think is interesting, if you think about like what are the biggest challenges today? Today, I don't know, most people don't use crypto on a regular basis. Even today, do I use crypto every day? Not really, right? I use crypto probably every week. I'll do some transactions, but not on a daily basis. And obviously, in the end, it would be really fantastic if crypto becomes something that, is so valuable, so useful that people will use like all the time. But I think there are different hurdles to that. for a long time, one of the hurdles was scalability. It was hard to get enough transactions into these chains, and they would be too expensive. But that's been mostly solved. So I think today, some of the main issues that remain are the user experience is pretty bad, and security is a concern. So, people often, maybe they end up signing some wrong transactions, they lose money, or it's just very confusing, like to use crypto. So I do think that things that really solve that problem are interesting. And I think the best way to solve that problem is probably going to be through AI. So that you're going to basically have some sort of, ChatGPT like interface maybe where you can be like, hey, this is what I want to happen on chain. And then that can kind of create these transactions. Maybe there's some verification to make sure it really matches what you want. And then it kind of gets executed on chain. And you kind of don't really have to deal with a lot of like the underlying things. And I think that could potentially be both more secure and way more user friendly. So I do think that is something that would be very interesting. And in general, this kind of AI crypto intersection, I think is going to be very important and could become very big. I think AI agents, right, is something that people talk a lot about, where you have some AI program that goes and executes something on your behalf, maybe over time. And I think crypto can be a very good substrate for these agents, right, where they can control funds, issue transactions. So I think that's probably one of the most interesting areas in crypto, and that I think could be most promising in, really dramatically scaling up usage and adoption.
Are there any like specific chains or protocols you're keeping a close eye on at the moment, either like technologically or just philosophically?
I mean, I certainly follow quite a bit sort of the major chains like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Solana. I think all of those are great. I'm a fan of all of those. They have different trade-offs, different philosophies, but I think they're all valuable. I think when it comes to the long tail, I mean, I am also pretty involved in a VC fund, and we do some early stage investments there. Actually, we invested in a company that's trying to do something like what I just described before, around this kind of AI transact wallet, AI account type thing. So I do spend time on like early things there, and of course with Course One, we run quite a lot of different networks. So we look at a lot of these different protocols, but it's been hard for a lot of protocols to really get traction and to get adoption. We've seen some concentration on, people kind of focus on some of the main ones, and especially around price as well. I mean, people who follow crypto or even just vaguely, they're probably aware that, okay, Bitcoin's doing like super well, right? Bitcoin's basically was just on an all-time high right now, roughly. But if you look at a lot of other stuff like Ethereum, Solana, that's far from all-time high. And if you look at further out on all these altcoins, a lot of them are, they can be massively below their previous all-time highs. So you can really see that a lot of the long tail of crypto has had a hard time and is kind of struggling a bit. Now, we may see that change in the next few months, but I think on a high level, it's probably going to remain the case that a lot of protocols, struggle a little bit. And, they really need to kind of prove out that they can get a lot of adoption and traction and generate revenues before you see that trend reverse.
What do you think the biggest hurdle to crypto adoption is? Do you think it might be generational, or what's your thoughts?
I think first of all, we need so if you think of what is crypto for, then you obviously have the use case of speculation, right? So people can just buy and sell Bitcoin and ETH and maybe altcoins. And they could either do that on a centralized exchange, like a Binance or a Coinbase, or they could do it on chain in a decentralized way. I think if you look at that, I mean, that's really growing massively. And I think the generational thing that you mentioned is actually a big factor there as well. I think if you ask people, between, like, I don't know, 18 and 30, do you own crypto and do you own stocks? I think it's, I may be wrong here, but I think I've seen data that was like, oh, there's more people owning crypto than stocks, right? They find out much more interesting, much more exciting, more accessible. Well, of course, if you're going to ask like, people over 65, it's going to be like completely different. So I think for sure what you're going to see is, as with time, older generations die and wealth is inherited by younger generation. I think that is going to be a factor that's going to drive crypto forward. And of course, the integration of crypto in all kinds of apps. It's really, things like Robinhood, Revolut are great examples of that. Make it super easy to access it. So I think those things are there. But then I think to have really use cases that people use on a day-to-day basis that maybe are outside of speculation. I think we just need to have better use cases, better user experience, more creative entrepreneurs, better product experiences. So I think that's going to take time, and yeah, it's still been a little bit of a struggle, I think, to find like the best use cases that are outside speculation. Although of course in some cases, very interesting use cases, they are kind of at the intersection of speculation and something else. So I think Polymarket is a great example. I don't know if you're familiar with Polymarket, but Polymarket is basically a prediction. It's a betting site. It's a prediction market. So, for example, you could bet on who's going to be the next US president. And Polymarket got massive amount of attention during the elections. And, there was people betting hundreds of millions overall on, is Trump going to win or Kamala Harris going to win? And what was interesting is that, Polymarket was a lot more accurate than the polls, right? I mean, Polymarket, Trump ended up being like quite a strong favorite, whereas, the polls were like 50-50. And of course, it's also you have the kind of dynamic that like, if you feel like you have some information or you feel like this market is wrong, you can go and you can bet on it, and then you will change the odds. So for me, it was also very interesting, maybe in the past, you'd be like, what's going on with the presidential race? You go to like news websites and you see like, oh, there's this article, there's that article. But now I'd be like, let me just go see Polymarket, right? And it's like, nothing's really changed, right? It's the same odds. Like, that's it, right? Because if something happened, it would move, right? Like people would start betting there. So I think you have Polymarket has, all kinds of, I checked on Wimbledon before the Wimbledon final. I was like, hey, I'm curious, what are the odds on like Alcaraz versus Sinner and stuff? So I think that's a great, example. Of course, it's not all that unique. You have betting sites already, but it's pretty cool, and it is something that's valuable, right, for a lot of people to like know what are the odds of certain events happening.
That's really interesting that I hear you say that. I was familiar with the site. I didn't know the name. Now you've explained it to me. I do actually know it. Yes, no, I did hear lots of good things about that. Usually when you're betting money, I think the opinions are more honest when there's money on the line. So nothing talks quite honestly like money. Just because we are coming towards the end of the interview, unfortunately, one more question for you. So if you look at your journey, are there any like hard learned lessons or any advice that you would give to someone who's maybe starting out like you were 10 years ago or something? What would you say to them?
Let me just say some things that I think we did well and some things that we did not do as well. So first of all, I think the thing we did well, and that's definitely something I would always want to try to do if I started another company at some day, is, just be early. So we were there, we started Course On as a proof of stake company when there was no industry, when, there was no competition, when we were like the very first ones. Now, other people started companies around the same time. So, but still, we were very, very early, and that was like massive. I think if you had gone much later, we would not have succeeded. So, I think that's one thing. I would say another thing is I was very lucky in, choice of my co-founder. We worked together super well. And so I think having, a great co-founder is something that's very valuable. Maybe some people can do it alone, but I think if you have a, great co-founder, that's something great. So these are two things. Now, on the mistakes, one of the biggest mistakes we made was just not being focused enough. So we would like work on our main thing and then explore other ideas and spend a lot of time on exploring some other ideas. And in the end, we're like, I can't really do both at the same time. So we have to make a decision. Do we keep our main business going, pursue this other idea? And we're like, we don't want to stop the main thing, so we abandon the other ideas, but we'd waste so much energy, so much time on this. So I think that is something that, was just a massive mistake that, cost us quite dearly. So I would say today, if I were like talk someone who wants to start a company, I would be like, first do like an exploration phase, right? Where you say like, I don't actually know if I'm going to start this company. I don't know what it will look like. Let me just like learn and play around with it and think through it and talk with people and develop a vision or something like that. And be kind of not very committed to any particular path. But then at one point you have to be like, okay, but now we're going to go and now we're going to focus. And now you have to be very, very vigilant to say no to other things. And so that was a significant mistake we made, a big learning for us. And I think another one would be, to end things early if they're not working. So this is also something where, we've had projects that didn't work. We've had people who weren't the right people for their role. And, I think in many cases we were too slow. We waited too long. We should have maybe replaced the person earlier or ended this thing earlier. And that can be very difficult. I think if you talk with people about their experience with letting people go, I mean, it's almost universal when they say like, "Oh, we let this person go," and like, "I wish I'd done it 6 months earlier." So I think it's hard to not make that mistake, but I think to really cut things when they're not working is very important. And I think it has massive benefits in just being faster and being able to move faster. And maybe one way that can help you do that is just be really clear about the underlying assumptions. So let's say if you start a project, be clear on like, hey, what are the results you think this should generate? What are the assumptions under which this project makes sense? And then if you like 3 months in, you can be like, okay, what do the results actually look like? And are the assumptions that we made in the beginning actually true? Or maybe we learned they're not true. And, similar if you like hire someone, maybe if you can really be like, okay, what are the results you expect and hold people accountable and then take actions quickly. I think this is a massive, it just makes a huge difference.
Thank you, Brian. That's really some gold advice there for anyone watching. Thank you for being so honest and candid with us. And I just want to thank you again for taking time to speak with us today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks so much, Barry. It's great being on.
That was Brian Crain, CEO and co-founder of Chorus One.